Okay, let's preface this whole thing with some background. I'm very much like you guys. I was passionate about training and exercise from the time I was about 8. My father was an athlete. He was a shot putter. And as a young boy, I just became very interested in muscles. And I started pulling springs when I was 8. Bought my first barbell when I was 12. Started working out with all that. And then my parents split, and I became grandly obese. I went from 127 up to 185. No increase in height. Diagnosed with high blood pressure. Had skin diseases. But I had a way out. I was reading the muscle magazines of the day. Now, they were not as prolific as they are today, but those guys became my mentors. And this was when the physical culture movement had sort of blossomed. The physical culture movement had started in the 1800s, and by the 1950s it was sort of blossoming. And this was previous to the medical establishment having taken control of all our minds. So I could still gather my influence from these guys. But of course, I wasn't able to critically evaluate anything that I read or anything that I was told because I had no training, I had no background. So I continued to do this for years, and I continued to experiment with all kinds of things. I was an athlete, a football player. I was a Pennsylvania State shot put champion, primarily because I lifted weights. And my passion, however, became to solve this obesity problem. And more than that, I wanted to get cut. That was my goal because I had been so obese and had taken such abuse from that. So I finally realized that all the stuff I was reading in these magazines and books had no value to it. Nothing that I was doing was working the way it should. And I finally said, okay, none of these guys know what they're talking about. So I decided to go back to graduate school because I figured the PhDs would know, and that's how I could get my education. And I had been a terrible student. All I cared about was playing sports and training. So I had to go back and make up 30 credits in the sciences at a Pennsylvania State University, local place around where I live, to get admitted to grad school. So I got admitted to grad school at the Temple Biokinetics Laboratory. And then a buddy grabbed me, who was a weightlifter, and said, you got to come up to medical school because you won't learn anything down here. Well, I wasn't thinking that I was particularly bright, although I did do well in these courses that I made up, which is actually the first time I ever studied, including high school and college. So I got accepted in the Department of Physiology at Temple University School of Medicine, and started that and started taking the coursework to become a PhD in physiology, which is the study of the structure and function of the body. Now, my primary purpose, however, was to gather the information that I so desperately wanted. How do muscles work? How do you optimize increases in muscle strength? How do you optimize reductions in body fat? I was passionate also about maximal athletic performance. So how do you maximize your performance? What do you have to do dietetically, training-wise, and all that? So I started the process of getting the coursework out of the way, and also, importantly, part of the teaching process was to learn how to do research into all the publications in a medical library, how to find it, ask what you want to find, and then go read it. But even more important than that was learning what research is all about. Learning that it is a give and take, a pro and a con. If you read the newspaper, you say, oh, a new study just came out in the New England Journal of Medicine today saying that. That's it. There's nothing else. There's no more to it than that. The study came out, we buy it, we believe it. It's not true. None of that's true. There's biases, there's prejudices. You have to take a subject if you want to be good and competent, and you have to study every aspect of it. So I developed a habit when I would get into a new topic that I would go back in the scientific literature as far back as I could go. If that took me back to the 1800s, because I wanted the historical perspective of what people had been saying. Well, I won't give you the details of the whole story, but what I learned is the PhDs really didn't know what they were talking about either. Maybe in their little own subject, but nobody there was interested in the subjects that I was interested in, and they knew nothing about them at all. So I took subjects like muscle physiology. That was the main one I did. And this was started in the late 1970s. And I just collected hundreds of research papers on muscle physiology, and particularly training studies on how to cause a muscle to get stronger and get bigger. So gradually I would master these subjects and I'd move on to another one. In my own personal life, I had become a vegetarian in 1973, still unable to critically evaluate anything I was hearing. And at that time, we were just coming away from the dawning of the hippie movement, of which I was part, because I'm part of the baby boomer crowd. I was born in 1947. So there was a movement towards vegetarianism at that time, so I adapted that routine. And for 3 years, I was a vegetarian zealot. Horrible. I was horrible. I picked on people who were not vegetarians, terrorized them. And unfortunately, during that time, I lost all the muscle I'd gained. And I was dying. I was sick. I was tired. I was exhausted all the time. And so I finally realized vegetarianism did not work. And I gave that up and moved into a complex carbohydrate diet. Simple versus complex carb. That did nothing. Well, I'm getting more skilled. I'm working in a laboratory now. We're doing body composition studies where we stick people in a tank of water. I'm reading. I'm studying. We're doing very sophisticated analyses. We're doing oxygen uptake measurements on people to see what their maximum performance capability was. I did my master's thesis on the female rowers from the Vesper Boat Club down in Philadelphia, and the training program they were using, which was adapted from the German rowers at the time. Found out some interesting things from that. So outside of academia, my passion remained nutrition, and I continued to study that and experiment with that. And I did every experiment you could possibly imagine, dietetically, during the course of, say, 10 years. And I plotted all my changes and everything else, and I continued to read. Unknowing to myself, I had adapted a low-carbohydrate regimen when I was a teenager. It wasn't the Atkins version of a low-carb diet. It was just a lot of meat and fat, not much carbohydrate or vegetables or fruit or anything like that, with good result. So it was about the late 1980s that I adapted to the Atkins diet. And he says, of course, calories don't count. Eat all the protein and fat you want, and you don't tell that to a former 245-pound football lineman, because he will. So I promptly gained 5 pounds. And I realized the Atkins diet wasn't good. So the next step was to figure out what went wrong with the Atkins diet and develop a version of my own. So by this time, clearly there was nothing I could not read in the scientific literature. I collected thousands upon thousands of papers and just read and studied. So finally at age 55, I realized that I had done more than anyone, that I knew more than anyone, and it was time to write a book. So I wrote that big book back there, and it took me about a year. I self-published it, put it out there, and have written several other books since then on anti-aging, on other books on diet and weight control. So the interesting thing that happened, I went on some forum in 2002, and I knew nothing about the internet. I knew nothing about forums. I knew nothing about flame wars. And I very rapidly got involved in a flame war. So I'll finish this introduction up quickly. What you need to understand, people say to me all the time, what are you saying? What are you recommending? What is the Ellis diet? It is not my diet. It's a diet that I reverse engineered based on all the science that I've collected over the years. So anything that I'm going to tell you is based on a critical analysis of all the published research on any topic that we're going to discuss. So you're not going to get any of my ideas. None of these things are going to be my ideas. And I'm going to I know the questions that are going to come at me, and I know I'm going to rock a lot of your worlds. I'm going to rock a lot of your belief systems. But I'm going to give you facts and not belief systems. So try and keep that in mind as we all get riled up. So this will be fun. So that's it. That's my history. That's my background. That's what I do. I have the same passions and interests that you guys do. And I'm here to give you information that you can take